Hi guys, I'm Richard Beck with Beck Tools, and in this video I'm going to show you how to build your disc sander. So first thing you're going to do, you're going to grab your parts and we're just going to clean them up. Make sure there's no burrs or any slag. The reason for that is if your parts get any surface rust or flash rust, it's going to be easier to clean them when they're flat than when they're welded together. You have a couple slots here on this plate. You have tabs here and a slot here. This only goes together one way. You're going to put your side pieces like that, so that way these slots line up. And you're going to take your gussets just like that, and these will help hold everything square. A nice welding magnet will come in handy for this part, just to make sure that this stays where you want it. Now, the best way to make sure this doesn't move when you weld it is hit the ends there and the opposite end before you start welding on the side. So we're going to tack everything and pre-assemble it before we finish welding anything. That way, if you make a mistake, it's really simple to grind the tack off and fix it before you fully weld it. So it's going to be critical that we do that. Also, any other parts sitting around, move them far away so you don't get spatter all over them. Having weld spatter on your parts is just one more thing you have to clean off before you weld it together, because that could hold a piece out of position. So we're going to start with the base and the side plate and one gusset. I'm using my Everlast, what is it, 253 DPI. I love this thing. I always forget the name, but I'll put a link to this welder in the description if you don't have one. This is one of those welders, it'll be the last one you ever need to buy. It's powerful enough to do 3/4 thick, you know, with multiple passes, and you can do 24 gauge thin sheet metal. It does it all. It even does brazing. So let's get started. Also, some anti-spatter spray is really helpful. Give it a nice dose. This is going to save you time. Spray welding doesn't make much mess, but just want to show it for the camera. Spatter spray is your friend. Okay, hit that. Now I'm going to hit the opposite side, and that's going to try to hold it from going side to side. I actually had my welder set for straight MIG and not spray weld right there, but that's fine. Either process is fine. Now I'm going to tack the gusset. So now that I have this tacked in on the ends and it's really straight, I'm going to go ahead and hit this gusset. I'm going to kind of hold it down a little bit while I hit this end. And now I'm going to hit the top. Okay. Beautiful spray welds with no spatter. I love that. So that's all we're going to do, right? We're not going to continue to weld crazy. We're going to make sure this is all correct before we finish weld anything. Also, make sure there's nothing underneath on these flat spots. That is going to hold this up and out of position. That's one of the reasons we want to clean up the parts first. Make sure your magnet is clean, especially on the two faces that need to be perpendicular to each other. Push in. Putting heavy tacks, right? But nonetheless, they are still just tacks. Okay, so that's the base, guys, right there. So now we're gonna move on to the top part. So this is your motor plate. So the easiest way to put this together is to lay it down, hang it off the edge so that this part right here is off the edge of the table like this, and then gravity will actually be your friend. So just slip that in there, slip this in there, kind of put them out a little bit. It's easier if you take your gloves off. I'm gonna take your gussets. Now the gussets will only go in one way because I have a big slot and a little, big tab and a little tab, so you don't have to worry, it won't go in the wrong way. Once you have that, clean your magnet. That's how it's gonna go. Now once again, I'm gonna take this off so I don't get spatter on it. Also, the nice thing about this new disc sander, way less pieces. A ton less pieces, and most of the pieces are the exact same piece used twice. So it's a lot easier to put together, way less room for error. Once again, I'm gonna hit this end and this end, and then I'm gonna hit the top and the bottom of the gusset. We're just tacking still because we wanna make sure that everything fits together before we really go crazy. Magnet, wipe, always wipe the face of your magnet. Make sure there's nothing on it that's gonna hold it. Because if it doesn't hold it square, you've defeated the whole purpose. Now it's time to weld the hex nuts to the inside. Now, the only reason we're welding these is just so they don't fall out, and it just makes building this thing easier. You don't have to weld them, but I like to weld them so that way they're always there, they never get lost. So I'm just gonna put that on, and I'm gonna tack it on 2 spots and then take it out really quickly so that heat doesn't soak into the shoulder bolt. That will allow me to move it over there without it getting hot. Now, no need to overdo these tacks and destroy the hex nut. Just, you know, hit it so that way it stays put. We're gonna do the same thing to this side, and this shoulder bolt's not even hot because we worked quickly. Now always use the bolt, that way you get the nut correctly lined up with the hole. So set those aside. Now we're gonna weld the work rest. So here's an opportunity to mess things up. So we wanna take a little bit of extra care with this part to make sure we don't put these on incorrectly. See, you could do it like this, and you could have these on the top instead of the bottom. This is how you're gonna use the work rest with this cutout away from you, which means it shouldn't be this way when you're welding it because it'll be upside down. You actually put this cutout facing you, and then the holes also face you, okay? Basically, when you're using it on the grinder, it'll be correct. These need to be perpendicular if you want this to work really well. This is a fabrication project. This isn't a precision machining project. So a hammer may be required depending on your skill level of welding. Also, if you put a ton of heat into these, it's gonna wanna warp up the ends. So I'm not going to put very much heat. I'm gonna do the ends and the ends. Now this end is gonna be easier, and there's enough slop in there that you do need to use a square to make sure that these are held, not just straight, but you know, you could wiggle them side to side. So press them against the edge of the slot, make sure they're straight up and down, and if it does get, you know, if it warps one way or the other, a simple dead blow with some persuasion will get it dialed in perfect. Same goes with any of these plates. When they're still tacked, you can kind of, you know, persuade them one way or the other. You can also, you know, if you were to warp something, you could put some material underneath and clamp on both sides. So fabrication, this is part of it. Steel does move when you apply heat to it. I'm gonna hit this right here. Now I'm gonna hit this side. Okay, now because I'm just hitting the ends, it shouldn't warp one way or the other. Now we're gonna take the other one, put it on this side, and then once again, we're going to... Now these are pretty heavy. I wouldn't call these tacks. I'm holding this trigger for a good while. Now, you have a gap here. You can fill this with weld. If you fill this with weld, make sure you clamp this down and you leave it clamped until it cools completely, because that can induce some amount of warping. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna clamp this and then I'll grind this smooth so that way these aren't getting in the way. So I actually leave this a little bit shallower than the top. That way when you grind it flat, you don't grind the weld all the way off. This also means you can weld on top and not warp these side to side. Okay, so now I'm gonna fill these troughs with weld, and all of the welding will be finished. All right, beautiful. There's barely anything to grind off, and I am going to leave this completely clamped until that cools down to make sure it stays flat, because trust me, this will want to rise if it can. And if this does bend at all or warp, you can lay it on a flat steel surface or an anvil and use a dead blow to get it nice and straightened back out. You should be good. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and assemble this in order to do the finish welding. That way we know everything is good before we finish welding. So now you're going to take your shoulder bolts and these rubber washers, and you're going to put this thing together. So easiest way is to get this started a little bit, and then I'm using my belly here to balance this, and then get the other one. Actually, get one started first. Once that's started, we can then use a coat hanger or a piece of welding wire to fish this down in there. You can even use something like this. Drop my rubber washer in there. And that allowed me to feed the shoulder bolt through the washer and then lift that into position to get it started into the hex nut. Wiggle it a little bit. Okay. Remove your piece. And rotate this around will help it get the rubber washer onto the shoulder of the shoulder bolt. Try not to, once it gets a slightly tight, so you don't want to shear it, use something in there to kind of lift up as needed. Okay, now we're going to get the other side. All right, so now that both shoulder bolts are bottomed out and locked in, and it pivots. All right, so that's what we wanted to ensure before we weld everything together, that it's not bound up. It should not be bound. It kind of, you know, has a little bit of friction because of the rubber. So it's good. At this point, we can fully weld out all of the rest of the frame. Now, there's a couple strategies you could do. You could fill these in, but then you have to grind them smooth because it's the bottom. So I'm not going to do that. I'm simply going to weld the gussets, and I'm going to weld the outside here. I'm going to weld the outside here. Now, on the motor plate, I am going to fill these slots, right? And nothing has to be ground off here. So that's going to be the easiest way to do the motor plate. Just fill up all these slots. Now, none of this should generate enough heat to damage these rubber washers, so they can stay in there. And frankly, if you tape off the heads of these nuts, you don't have to take this apart for painting, actually, unless you want to get paint down in there. So you can disassemble this. All right, let's weld it up. It doesn't really matter where you start from, as long as you don't just, let's alternate our heat, guys, so that way we're not warping this, okay? Start and just alternate from side to side, side to side. Don't just, you know, do it in one big long ring. I'm gonna start up here on the top and weld. Let's fill these in first. It's gonna be a nice and easy thing to do. And make sure you hold on to it so it doesn't tip out of the way. All right, now I'm going to weld these gussets and we're going to call it good. Okay, while the welded frame is cooling down, we're going to assemble the work rest here. So it's how we're going to do that. So we're going to take your 1/2 inch shoulder bolt, I'm going to put it through the pivot point. We're going to put the 1/2 inch rubber washer right there. Put that through and put this nut on. Now, this nut here can also be welded into place, or you can just Loctite it, or just make it really tight and it, you know, shouldn't come loose. I do like to put one little tack on there, which I will do. And if it's a real small tack, it won't damage the washer. But like I said, you can just use Loctite. I wouldn't use permanent Loctite like the red, otherwise you have to grind this nut off or heat it up to get it apart. Not that you should ever have to take it apart, but permanent is kind of final. So take the other side. Also, clean off any flash rust you might have on here, because it's easier to do. Actually, you'll probably want to paint these, or you can just oil them, since these actually rub metal to metal, and any paint's gonna get ripped off when you put this in and out. So this is something you could oil, you could nickel plate, you could get black oxide coated. We're gonna put that shoulder bolt through there. We're gonna put the 1/2 inch rubber washer, and we're gonna slide that through, and we're gonna put the nut on. And this nut, the shoulder bolt completely bottoms out, and this nut locks it on in place, right? So it does not have to be welded as long as you get that nice and tight. Now you're gonna take your 3/8 carriage bolt, and you're gonna wedge this 3/8 washer right in between there, and then pop it through to the other side. And then on the other side, you're gonna put your handle on there. So the handle, you're gonna get that started, and then you're gonna hold on to the center, pull out, and then do 1/2 turns. And then once you get it started well, if you're pulling out on the handle, you can then just rotate this with your fingers until it's almost all the way in. And at that point, you go back to, doing 1/2 turns. So when you pull out, you can move it. When you let go, it locks, and then you can tighten it. So you're gonna leave it loose for inserting it into the grinder. All right, the other side is the same. Take your beautiful powder coated steel handles, take your washer, 3/8 rubber washer, wedge it between the two, feed it all the way through to the other side, and install the handle. And if they're both in the same spot, it's going to make installing this into the grinder a lot easier. All right. Now, you're going to put a carriage bolt and handles through here and install it. Next thing is we're going to take a carriage bolt and put it into each one of these square holes. And we're going to take a handle. You got a ton of these. You got 6 of these handles. And this time it's, it's easier just to turn the other side. And when you get about halfway, don't go any farther because this has to slide into a slot. Install the other one. All right, so now the work rest is done. You're gonna take your carriage bolt, put it through the slot, put your 3/8 washer, and then slide it down. Poke it all the way through on the outside here, and then put your handle on. This is the handle that is going to lock the angle of the grinder. Just like that. All right. So we're going to take our carriage bolt, put it through, put the rubber washer on, slide it down, pop it all the way through, and install the handle. All right. At this point, you can install your work rest. It's a little bit snug, but a lot of that is just the texture from the laser cutting. You can sand that down, put some grease on it. When you get it almost in, pull these out, just like that. All right, now you see how this is not held? So On the inside, we've got some tabs here that are gonna make sure that this thing is held nice and solid. Now, the reason I wait until the end here is so that way we know that these fit in before we tack those in place, right? Because if you put those in and they're slightly twisted or angled, it could make installing your work rest really complicated. Okay, so now we're gonna install these guys right here. It might be a little hard to see. So we've got this guy right here, and it goes right there in that tab. Kind of want the arm to be in position when we tack that to make sure that the fit is just right. And I'm gonna put a big heavy tack right on the top. Now we're gonna do the same for the other side. And see, I might have to move this a little bit just to make sure that we're in. Okay, we're gonna hold that in position and we're gonna hit it with a tack right on top. So when you put the weld on top, it'll pull this open and you'll have a gap. So I'm gonna put a little clamp here and make sure you're not squeezing this too tight. You shouldn't be able to. Put a little clamp there, and then I'm gonna put a nice little heavy bead right there. Okay, we go to the other side. Do the same thing. All right, there we go, guys. It's all done. This is like a really heavy-duty disc sander that should last you a lifetime. Tilts in the horizontally. Work rest also tilts. And on this, and the work rest is completely removable. In the past, you could not just take the work rest all the way off like that, but this version allows you to fully remove the work rest. That way, if you want to do some grinding in the horizontal position, you can do that without the work rest in your way. If you have any questions about the Beck Tools disc sander, hit me up in the comments below. I'm happy to answer your questions. I hope this build was a lot of fun. And if you haven't built one and you want to, check them out at becktools.com. Also, if you're a subscriber of the channel, make sure you hit that like button. That really helps out the channel. It tells YouTube that this content is worth watching, and it helps share it out there, and that's the best thing you can do. If you can't afford to buy a disc sander, you can still help out by giving me that thumbs up. Thanks a lot, guys. If you want to see more content like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Also, check out the links in the description and help out the companies that help us. So all of those links in the description are companies that have chose to put their name in the ring with us here at Beck's Armory. And anytime you use those links, we do get a finder's fee. So we much appreciate you using our affiliates because they have chosen to stand by us. Thank you. I'll see you next time.